we wake, hear the birds and see the sun.
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming to my channel. Today this video is going to be all about my birth story and how Nora Tandy came into this world and everything that goes with that. So I do have my baby here in front of me, so if you hear little coos or sounds or anything, that's just her. She is somewhat waking up from a nap, but she's kind of still drifting off, so she might go in and out of the nap. But she's smiling right now. She's on like a little play mat over here. I've got some hot chocolate, I've got my water, and Nora's got her passy, and we are good to go. The plan was to video as much of the birth as possible, but because of the way how it all went down, and you'll hear in just a minute, I didn't want to record everything. It was just a lot. If you've listened to some of my other videos, you know that our plan was to have a home birth, and that was what we dreamt of and couldn't wait. And we were planning on having a home water birth where we had like the tub and our midwife and doula come, and it'd be this really neat experience. So what happened was I had my doula, and we were going to meet my midwife with Chip, of course, and we were going to our 38-week appointment, and I walked in and my midwife, you know, checked me out, did some goodness. It is so hard to do video with her in here because she's so stinking cute. So I get distracted. Went to see my midwife at our 38-week appointment, walked in, she asked me questions, how I was feeling. She always does like a test thing that shows you how much protein is in your urine, and she always checks my blood pressure, my weight, and all of that. And whenever I went in for my 38-week appointment, my blood pressure at 37 weeks was, well, I saw her 36 and 37. 36, it was a little bit higher than normal, my blood pressure was, and at week 37, it was a little bit even higher, and at week 38, it was extremely high, and I had a good bit of protein in my urine, so it was really, really hard to hear, but my midwife looked straight at my face and told me that I'd have to go to the hospital and be induced, and I broke down because when you have that birth that you've been dreaming of and been planning out, and like you've been envisioning, having it change on you completely was something I just wasn't ready for, even though I should have been somewhat open to it. Anything could happen and I could have to go to the hospital. The best way to put it was I was completely heartbroken, and I'm gonna try not to cry talking about it now. It's just yeah, I just envisioned bringing her into this world like in our bedroom in a tub with just me, Chip, my midwife, and doula, and that was just something that I, you know, had envisioned since we found out we were pregnant. And so to so quickly have to be told that none of that was going to happen. I couldn't even try a water birth at the hospital, and I had to be induced. There was no me waiting to see if I could go into labor naturally. My midwife sent me to the hospital to get checked out, and what I didn't know, which I'm glad happened, but I ended up still being able to be in the midwifery care of the hospital once we got there. That was really nice to know that a lot of what we wanted in a home birth we could still potentially have through the midwifery care side of the hospital. Whenever my midwife told me that there's a, you know, in the beginning they always tell you there's a chance that you could go to the hospital, so keep that in mind. Well, I thought, that's never gonna happen. I've been having a great pregnancy. Like I'm pretty healthy. I eat pretty good. We exercise. Like, bless you. Bless you. I don't have any serious underlying health issues. You know, I just didn't see how we weren't gonna have a home birth. Now I just realize anything could happen at any moment. And so if you're a mama, it's such a hard thing to grasp, but if you can go ahead and grasp the fact that your birth plan may change, you know, the best thing is for you and your baby to be completely healthy. But it is still hard when you've envisioned it in a way like I did. Like I envisioned lights and pictures and you know, Chip just reading scripture over me and worship music playing and her just like being born through the water. And she's such a wiggle worm. She's like wiggling off of the playmat. But she is so advanced. I'm gonna have to do a video just on like what she's like in her first month and everything. I'm so thankful my doula, Allie, was with us after going to see my midwife, Jennifer, and her telling us that we would have to go to the hospital and be induced. I couldn't take in that we were gonna have her at the hospital. Not that there's anything wrong with the hospital, it just wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to have a home birth in the tub. Like that's what I wanted. To explain, I don't have any issues with the hospital. That's just what I wanted. So we went and got Chick-fil-A and we went to the hospital, and thankfully I had my doula with me, and she was so much support and help for me and Chip. You know, she was just telling me it's okay to be upset. It's okay to not think it's okay right now. It's okay to not be okay, that her and Chip were there with me through it. Okay, so she is eating, so I just zoomed in the camera a little bit. So anyways, they sent us to the hospital that night. Once we got there, they actually said that we were able to go home and like rest for the evening and kind of like process everything, and then we could come back in the morning and they could run more tests and see what they needed to do. That's what we did, and I'm glad we did that, because the next day I realized how exhausted I was because I was crying so hard. You know when you cry so hard that it makes you so tired. We went home and I took a bath. I tried to calm down. We just laid down, Chip rubbed my feet. We just prayed and had like our last night together with it just being us two. And still at that point, there was a small chance that I didn't have to be induced. After they ran the test, they could tell me for sure. Pretty much we were just going with I was gonna have the baby at the hospital. We woke up the next morning and went to the hospital, got checked out, ended up having an extreme amount of protein in my urine. They said that normally a pretty bad amount is like 0.01, or what was it? Or was it 0.03? And I had 1 point something. They said that it was for sure that I had preeclampsia because my blood pressure was even higher than it was the day before. So they checked me. I was a centimeter dilated and 60% effaced at that point. They were going to admit me and run a few more tests. I think they were gonna check my blood and then also do an ultrasound to see how big she was, to know if I needed a C-section or not, because I did indeed have preeclampsia. So I don't really know how I got it. I don't really know how you develop it, but that explained why my legs and feet were so swollen. They were so swollen. My hands weren't as bad, but they were still swollen, but not as bad as my legs and feet. So once we got in there, I was praying at that point that I could still try to have her vaginally and not have to have a C-section, because really ultimately if we had any control over it, I really didn't want to have a C-section. And the midwives that I was dealing with at the hospital knew that, and they knew I was wanting to have a home birth, so they were really accommodating to me and wanting to make it as close to what I had originally planned. So they did an ultrasound, and the midwife I was working with said if she's 9 pounds or bigger, you're probably gonna have to have a C-section because it's not safe with preeclampsia to try to do a vaginal birth with that large of a baby. Again, we were thinking that I just had a lot of fluid in my stomach and that she really wasn't that big. Well, the ultrasound tech said that her estimate was 8 pounds and 13 ounces, which is still a pretty big baby. But thankfully the midwife that I was dealing with, she was like, yes, you can still go for a vaginal birth. So I was admitted. My midwife was amazing, and she went through everything, all the choices I could have, all the things that I could say no to, all the different options that I had with them, which made me feel so good and still in a lot of control, which I really, really enjoyed. They started giving me, I don't remember the name of it, but it's like induction pills, and they give it to you, I can't remember if it's every 2 hours, every 4 hours, and it dissolves under your tongue. I just took one of those, then I guess my contractions were moving along enough then they started giving me Pitocin. But what they did was, before I got Pitocin, my midwife said that since I was being induced and I did want to have I was going for a vaginal birth, I had an option to do, I think they called it a Foley bulb. What it is pretty much, she explained, they put like a balloon inside your cervix and fill it up with this type of solution, and it causes you to go from like a 1 to a 3 to 4 centimeters in about 2 hours. So she said if I really wanted to have a vaginal birth, that it was a good idea to do that, since it was my first birth and we didn't know how long my labor was going to be, because if it was going to be an extremely long labor and if it was going to be a tough one, then there was a higher chance of me having a C-section, all these things. So she was saying it would be a really good idea too, but it was up to me whether I wanted to do it or not. So yeah, me and Chip talked about it, and we were like, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And if it's going to help and if it gives me a higher chance of having her vaginally, I want to do that. She told me what it was, but I did not quite understand how large this balloon is and how far they have to put it in you. And Nora was so low, her head was already so low, and she had already descended and everything. They had to literally move her head to get the balloon around to where it needed to be. That was probably the most traumatic part of my whole birth. It literally felt like someone was completely like violating you. It was something you just don't think that you would experience in labor, and it was completely traumatizing to me. And even though I'm somewhat glad we did it, because I did go to a 4 after 2 hours, it was extremely terrible. I felt totally violated. I just felt like something had been done to me. It was not a fun experience, even though it was beneficial to my birth. Not fun. It caused a lot of issues later on, which I'll kind of explain. But once they did that, I did ask them not to. They got the IV ready to give me Pitocin. I asked them to do the thing where I could walk around without it as long as possible until like they had to start doing it. So I was able to labor walking around and doing some things on my yoga ball, things like that. But before I get to the Pitocin, let me explain them pulling the Foley bulb out. Y'all, this thing was like massive. You should have seen how long it was. I can't even like show you my other hand. After 2 hours, she came over to me. She was like, I'm just gonna like wiggle it and just like see how it's doing. She just yanked it out, which I guess I'm more so glad she did that, because then I just wasn't expecting it and it just got it over with. But oh my gosh, that hurt so bad. And when she yanked it out, it hit my leg, and the solution was so hard. Like this massive boulder like hit my leg. It was insane. Thank goodness that was out. It was painful, her pulling it out, but at least it was out and done with. And then we moved to Pitocin. That's when the contractions started getting a lot more intense. I can say if you are a pregnant woman, or if you're about to go through labor, or if you just want to know how to cope through labor, do not yell. Do not scream, do not do anything like that. Concentrate on your breathing, and doing moaning sounds was the only way I did what I did. At that point, the preeclampsia made my arms and legs feel like ants were under my skin. It was the worst feeling ever. I also had back labor because her back was against my back. Honestly, the contractions weren't anything. They weren't painful to me at all. The part that hurt so bad was the back labor. For me at least, my contractions in the front were, you know, like the waves and everything like they call it. Well, my back labor was just constant, terrible, excruciating pain. Back labor is terrible. I couldn't labor like I wanted to. I wanted to walk around and move and do different things and like lean on Chip and a sway and do different things like that just to like ease the pain. But I was in so much pain from my back that I had to just sit up straight, and that was the only way that I could do it. And at this point, we are 16 hours into labor. I think at this point, it was a long time to get to 7 centimeters, and I was just moaning and going through each wave and each contraction. Once I got in transition, that was when it was just the most intense, and I was breathing so much I felt like I couldn't catch my breath, so they gave me one of the little oxygen things on my nose, and that really helped. But I just couldn't catch my breath, and I was so tired because I didn't know we couldn't eat any food, just in case like I had to go get a C-section. I couldn't have any food on my stomach. I was exhausted, so hungry, tingly from my head to my toes. It was terrible, and then my back was hurting so bad. I'm in transition and my contractions are completely on top of each other, no breaks. It was the worst pain I've ever experienced, and I couldn't catch my breath. So I looked at Chip and I told him, I said, you know, if we're gonna have her vaginally and we don't want to get a C-section, I'm gonna have to get an epidural to rest to be able to push, because at this point I can't push. I'm so exhausted. Our midwives were amazing. I was crying to her because I didn't want to get an epidural. My goal was not to get one, and she just like grabbed my hand and was like, oh goodness. By the way, she has a really strong neck and moves around like crazy, so don't be worried if you see her bobblehead. That midwife was so precious and just grabbed my hands, and I'm bawling, crying, and she just says, you did an amazing job. You're exhausted and you're doing what you can to have the kind of birth that you want. So she just really encouraged me and made me feel like I wasn't failing, because I already felt like I'd failed, like my body had failed because I couldn't have a home birth, and then I didn't want to do an epidural, and I ended up asking for one. Yeah. Thankfully, whenever they came in and did the epidural, the anesthesiologist was so nice and talked to me the whole time through it. What's so funny is I didn't feel anything because my back labor... What are you doing? Because my back labor was so bad that I didn't feel anything that they did. It was just crazy. Well, the nice thing too was they gave me just a partial epidural. They just gave me a partial... What are you doing? They gave me a partial so that I could just rest for a few hours until I got closer to getting ready to push, and then they would stop the epidural at that point so that I could feel pushing. The best thing was I didn't even care if my contractions stopped. I just wanted my back to stop hurting. I could still feel a lot of it, but at the same time, the relief from my back was amazing. But I could still move my legs. I couldn't get out of the bed. They wouldn't let me get out of the bed. Look at her. Are you so sleepy now? I slept for, I think, 2 or 3 hours. They checked me and I was at a 9, and I think I slept for another hour, and then they checked me again. I was then at like a 9.5, but at that point it had been over 24 hours. I didn't even talk about when my water broke. My water broke like 20 minutes after they pulled the Foley bulb out. I called the nurse because I told her I thought my water broke, and they checked and I actually had just peed on myself. Then 10 minutes later I had that same sensation again, but it was like so much. So I told Chip, I was like, if I'm just peeing on myself again, there's a lot. So I called him back in. My water had broke. I had so much fluid from the preeclampsia that it just gushed and gushed and gushed. And I don't know how many times I had to change my bed pad. It was crazy. It was a lot of liquid. Fast forward, going back to, I got to 9.5, and at that point, it had been over 24 hours that my water had broken, which with preeclampsia and being on Pitocin and everything, they were really wanting me to go ahead and start pushing as soon as possible, because you can get an infection from being in labor for so long. Like I was, after your water breaking, they start getting nervous because you can get an infection. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, so they stopped my epidural at that point so that I could feel the pushing and everything. I started doing practice pushes, and we pushed for 4 hours. I think it was like 26 or 28 hours of total labor, I think. The pushing, it was really intense, but it wasn't terrible until like the last 20-40 minutes. Oh. Okay, so I had a little break. She's falling back asleep. Sweet girl. You're the sweetest girl. Really, it wasn't intense until the last 40 minutes. Well, it was all very intense, but it wasn't as terrible until the last 40 minutes. That's when she was crowning, and the ring of fire and all that you hear about, I did not feel that at all. I just felt a whole lot of stretching, and I just felt really stretched out, if that makes sense. It was still really painful, but it wasn't like a burning. I was expecting it to be burning and hot, and it wasn't. It was just a lot of stretching. I couldn't believe that I actually like pushed her out. It was kind of surreal. And then they put her on me. She was almost 9 pounds. She was 8 pounds and 15 ounces. She was a big girl, which is crazy to me because I was really small and Chip wasn't a big baby either. which I don't know if that actually comes from your parents' weight or whatever. All in all, and what was really nice is whenever I was pushing, I did have 2 tears. They were internal tears. I didn't have to be cut or anything like that because my midwives were amazing. What was so nice is they only checked me throughout labor whenever I wanted to be checked. So they initially checked to make sure the Foley bulb did help me progress. They checked then, and then I didn't want them to check until whenever I ended up being 7 centimeters was the next time I asked them to check me. But I actually thought I wasn't that far yet. We had some amazing midwives, and we were able to do a lot that we wanted to do with a home birth, and we were able to do that in the hospital, which was huge to me. But all in all, it still was like a very traumatizing birth, honestly, because I did struggle with postpartum depression. I still am struggling with it, not as bad as I was. I really wasn't gonna share about it, but I think it needs to be normalized a little bit more because honestly, going into labor, I thought, oh, there's no way I'll struggle with postpartum depression. I'm a very happy person. We've had a really good pregnancy. That has nothing to do with it. It's totally hormones, and everything you're feeling is totally normal. That's what was hard for me to grasp, because what happened was when my birth plan changed, I felt like I had no control, and I was completely heartbroken at the fact that I couldn't birth my baby the way that I wanted her to come into the world. I couldn't do that. I had to go to the hospital and be induced, which now I'm thankful for. I'm not saying I'm upset that we had to do it a different way. She just spit her passy out. So pretty much what happened, I was so traumatized by everything that I emotionally disconnected from the whole experience. And when they put her on me, I honestly did not feel like it was my baby. I didn't feel connected to her whatsoever, and I felt like I was a really bad mom for feeling that way. When we brought her home, about 5 or 6 days after we came home, I had a really bad night, and I guess I'd been acting differently since she's been born, and Chip just pulled me to the side and was like, you need to tell me how you're feeling. How do you feel about her? How do you feel about your birth? And I just broke down and said that I didn't feel like she was my baby. I felt like she was someone else's baby, that I didn't even go through birth whatsoever. I didn't feel like I had experienced any of that. And it was the most bizarre thing because I knew in my head I had experienced those things, and she is my baby, and I watched them put her on top of me. But my feelings just weren't matching up with it, and so it was really confusing and scary, and I felt really guilty. I just didn't feel connected to her, and I was having all these fears that if Chip left, he was gonna get in a car accident, and I was having all these terrible fears. And then there was a few nights where I was so exhausted and disconnected from everything that I did, like almost want to hurt her, and it was scary. But I ended up going to a therapy session, a postpartum therapy session, and it really helped me a lot because she kind of just explained to me, because of the Foley bulb whole thing and me feeling violated with that, that's whenever I started to emotionally disconnect, and that's why I didn't feel connected. But she encouraged me that that connection would come, and that it's a totally normal thing. But it was just extremely hard, and my recovery was really, really difficult. I might explain my recovery in another video. It's a lot, and I just wanted to say that it's totally normal to have all those feelings as a new mom, to not feel guilty. Because that was really hard for me to tell Chip that I felt like she wasn't my baby. I felt like a terrible mom for saying that. But yeah, so that was our birth story. I feel like it was kind of all over the place, and I probably missed out on a lot of details because that was 4 weeks ago. That's right now how much I can talk about it, and I needed some time to kind of process it before I really went through it again. Anyways, that's how we had our little Nora, and she's snoring right now. She's so sweet. She's literally the most precious thing. And don't worry, now I definitely feel that connection with her. I know it's just gonna continue to get stronger and everything. But I think we've made it through the hardest part. The first 2 weeks or 3 weeks were so hard. It's been the hardest thing we've ever done, but one of the coolest, best things ever, and we're obsessed with her. I mean, look at her. She's so sweet. So anyways, that's my birth story. Thanks for coming to my channel, and we'll talk to you guys next time. So
What we
bye.
have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but think